own experience as a professor of strategy and irregular warfare to follow a lecture by your wife discussing the center of gravity of Islamism. I can highly recommend it. Thank you. Thank you for sticking through this day. Let me begin with the legal vagaries of giving a presentation. That's a photograph from Egypt quite recently, and it's supposed to illustrate that we may want to reassess our strategy. And and I have to make a statement that nothing you're about to hear necessarily represents the views of the Department of Defense or any other US government agency. This is Dr. Gorka's personal analysis and opinion, nothing else. Good. I'm a baby of the Cold War. I grew up in the Cold War. It was the formative period of my life. My parents escaped Hungary during the anti-communist revolution of '56. My father escaping from a communist prison where he'd been given a life sentence for being a pro-democracy activist. I dearly miss the Cold War. It was really easy and simple. But one thing we don't remember well enough, and if you do not have Diana's book, you must get hold of Diana's new book, because it is priceless in demonstrating how similar the current threat environment is to that which we lived through for more than 4 decades. The important thing that I wish to always remind my officers and my students of is that whilst we may have had 25,000 nuclear warheads on either side of that standoff, whilst we may have had the Cuban Missile Crisis, Korea, Panama, you name it, the fact is, on November the 9th, 1989, not one shot was fired from one barrel, either from an AK-47 or from an M16. The Berlin Wall came down. How? Because we executed an ideological victory. Yeah. We economically bankrupted the Soviet Union because of our preeminence militarily. But fundamentally, when President Reagan stood up in Berlin in front of the Brandenburg Gate and said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," that had nothing to do with nuclear weapons. It was a message that, look at you, you need a wall to keep your citizens in, not to protect them, but to stop them leaving. So the Cold War, for me, is fundamentally an ideological victory and an ideological conflict. And I am convinced of the fact that today, despite 9/11 being the most successful terrorist attack of a physical, kinetic nature in the modern age, this is predominantly an ideological war. Don't take my word for it. How about our favorite target, our high-value threat, the head of Al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri? This is directly from the enemy. I say to you that we are in a war, and that more than half of this battle is taking place in the battlefield of the media. This man understands that this is about shaping perceptions, about narrative, about what can and cannot be said about the world, about the threat. And we need to recognize this fact. Now, I'm going to use some technical jargon, and I'll unpack it and explain it, but I know we have people here from the special operations community, from the IC, and from the FBI and so forth. Let me just give you a little warm feeling inside after all that you've heard today. 2 years ago, I wrote an article with David Kilcullen, who you may recall was General Petraeus' counterinsurgency advisor, a very bright Australian officer. One of the things we did in that article is we took the data from something called the Correlates of War database. It's a fascinating unclassified database run by a university, which has collected all the pertinent data from every war since Napoleon. All of them. Crunched them into one database with the details of where it started, how it ended, who was involved, how many casualties, and methodologies. It's a huge amount of information. We just wanted to crunch one issue, one point, onto a viewfoil, onto a graphic. And as you will see here, the point we tried to make is, if you look at the database, the big box, so the bounded large box, is all wars since Napoleon. And according to this database, it's 460. 460 wars since Napoleon. What's really fascinating is the tiny little red box. Less than 20% of all conflicts since Bonaparte has been conventional. Has been nations fighting nations, soldiers fighting soldiers. 380 out of 460 are irregular conflicts, such as fighting terrorists, fighting insurgents, fighting tribes, fighting clans. So for all of you out there who work irregular warfare, special counter-terrorism, special forces, don't worry, you don't have to look for another career just yet. The future will be more Al-Qaedas, more Al-Shabaabs, more AQIMs, more Al-Nusra fronts, not less. Despite the fact that the Pentagon, a very high-ranking officer in the Pentagon, made a statement at an unclassified conference a year ago, stating the following: Afghanistan and Iraq are the anomaly. We're going to get back to real war. Meaning, you know, tanks fighting tanks, dogfights between jet fighters. The data does not demonstrate that the next war will look like Korea or World War II. It's going to be messy and ugly, and it's going to involve ideology, because this is how they attack us most effectively. Now, that's the good news. Let's go back to the bad news. 9 years ago, nine years ago, the 9/11 Commission in America actually understood this war better than we understand it today. If you haven't read the 9/11 Commission report, I recommend it to you. Yes, it's 600 pages long, but it's really an uncommon government document for its honesty and its truth speaking. And remember, it was written by Democrats and Republicans together. And it's all available online. At least read the 20-page executive summary. When it was written, just a few years after 9/11, we understood as a nation that we must defeat an ideology. We cannot kill our way out of this war. It's not predator strikes and special forces actions that will provide us with security. It is counter-ideology, because we will not win this physically. Technically, we need to recognize something very interesting has happened in the last 13 years since 9/11. I'm going to go into a little bit of my technical field, but bear with me, it's just one slide. If you want to be a bad guy, if you want to be a Bin Laden, if you want to be a Lord's Resistance Army, a Boko Haram, a Taliban, there are two ways to be an insurgent. There's two schools, two theories. Okay? There's the Che Guevarist approach to irregular warfare, and there's Mao. These are the two big schools. And let me just summarize what they entail. Mao, handsome guy, nice haircut, snazzy beret, he's on all the t-shirts, yeah? His message, and if you've seen the really bad movie with Benito del Toro, you'll see it in the movie, it's that in a resistance fight against a government, it is the individual leader of the insurgency that mobilizes the people through his own catalytic behavior. He rides out into the hinterland on his Harley, hair waving in the breeze. He makes a few speeches, and then the peasants say, wow, he's cool, I'm going to drop my pitchfork and grab a gun. That is the Foucaultist school, from the Spanish for focal point, for the individual as the catalyst. Mao had a different theory, and it's technically called People's War. Mao said, no, it's not about me, it's not about my cabinet. I need to go out into the countryside, and I need to agitate, I need to create propaganda, I need to recruit cadre, I have to go out and create a grassroots movement and build, this is his big value added, a counter-state, a shadow government. You saw exactly this in Afghanistan with the Taliban, because the Taliban were doing what? Out-governing Karzai. Yeah? They were actually providing services, justice, courts that would, 24 hours, somebody stole your goat, there'd be a sheikh, an emir come in, deal with it, give you justice, and he's out. If you're waiting for Kabul to give you justice, don't hold your breath. Yeah? So out-governing the government. Now, these are the two schools. Only one of them is correct. Okay. Can you guess which one? Yeah. This man, handsome on all the t-shirts, died at the age of 39, a loser. Okay? This individual, short, fat, and ugly, not on the t-shirts, died in his bed at the age of 79 as the premier of China. Okay? This is rubbish. This works. Okay? And who cares? You just had, Dr. Gorka's lecture on IW theory. One very interesting point about this. You can make a pretty solid argument that bin Laden was a Guevarist. He read the wrong books, thank the Lord. Okay? He believed, look at 9/11, he believed that by making 3 big symbolic strikes against our economic, our military, and our political headquarters, the Ummah would rise up in a catalytic moment and destroy the West. Absolutely Foucaultist Guevarist. Yeah? And of course he was wrong, because people go, oh wow, that's really cool, 2 buildings came down, let me just sacrifice my whole life and my children in your honor. No, it doesn't work like that. People don't get generated and encouraged to do things like that so easily. But, if you look at the last 13 years, if you have the capacity, like Stephen Wolf, to go onto the internet, to especially the dark web, and read the jihadi chat blogs, the chat rooms, the discussion, the debates, you will see a fascinating discourse develop. Al-Qaeda and the threats we face are starting to understand Mao. They're starting to understand that it's not just about blowing stuff up and shooting people. And one of the greatest examples they have in all of this is, of course, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Ikhwan Muslimin. And they look at the Ikhwan Muslimin and they say, oh my gosh, those guys actually won control of Egypt without blowing anything up. How did they do that? Yeah? The indirect approach, the Maoist approach, the softly attitude to gaining power. And I showed this one photograph, and I can share it with you later, but I'll explain it to you. The important thing to note here is who this person is. That's Secretary Clinton, when she was still the most senior diplomat in the US government, shaking a certain person's hand who you maybe never have heard of until 2 weeks ago when he was arrested by the Egyptian military. That individual is Mohammed Badia. Now, one thing you need to know about the MB. The MB, the Muslim Brotherhood, is a very slippery organization. The only way that it has survived after 90 years of illicit activity, persecution by the Egyptian regime, you name it, being made illegal in numerous countries around the region. The only way it has survived is by creating a dual command structure, a binary command structure, a front man and a real headquarters command structure. For example, Mohammed Morsi is a nobody. He is a suit. He's like Ahmadinejad was in Iran. He's the front man who takes all the flack and gives all the interviews. The real mastermind behind the MB for decades has always been the individual who bears the title of Supreme Guide. Not the head, not the president, not the prime minister, not the secretary general, the Supreme Guide. And the Supreme Guide of the Brotherhood, until 2 weeks ago, was Mohammed Badia. Now, let's have a look at this photograph in its context. This photograph was taken just a matter of weeks before the first ever free elections in Egypt. Ever. And our Secretary of State is giving full press coverage FaceTime to the Supreme Guide of the MB, saying, oh wow, yes, you are our, interlocutor. Let's recognize you as a legitimate actor. Pretty useful, right? But at the same time, this individual, while he's having press coverage and press conferences with the US diplomats at the secretary level, gives an interview in Arabic to a local newspaper that, funnily enough, never gets translated into the New York Times and the Washington Post. And he says the following. This is a literal translation, 2 sentences from that interview for the local Egyptian and Arabic audience. Remember, 3 weeks before the election, first election ever, free election. He says, the caliphate is now possible, the caliphate is now imminent. And you need to understand the weight of that. He's saying the theocratic, absolutist empire of Islam is now possible again, and it's just around the corner, because that is what caliphate means. Theocratic empire, not Jeffersonian republic, as some people may think. Yeah? And what happens 3 weeks later? 70% of the seats in that election to Parliament go to the MB and the even scarier Salafists. Okay? Now, praise be the Egyptian people, it only took them 12 months to realize what was going on. Yeah? I mean, that's pretty amazing. If you look at the region in toto, it took them 12 months to realize Morsi is a dictator in sheep's clothing. And the military got rid of it. Now, I'm not a huge fan of Sisi, because there's some issues with what he's done since then. But the fact is, the Egyptians recognize the truth about the MB. And as Frank has said in his show again and again and again, and I really, with his permission, would like to use this and encourage everybody to use it. If the Egyptian people can reject the Brotherhood there, why can't we reject them in America? Copyright Frank F. Good. So that's the nature of the beast. Let me just don't take our words for it. Go to primary sources. I always say go to primary sources because it's hard to argue. How's this for a primary source? Osama bin Laden is from an unclassified SOCOM report that was released to West Point CTC. Everybody says, I mean, you heard about it. Let me go back. Sorry. What did Clapper say about the MB? A secular organization, not violent, cool dudes, right? Right? Well, what Bin Laden said, because Bin Laden should probably know MB quite closely, because he was a member. And all his lieutenants have been members. It's fascinating. Whether it's Zawahiri, Zawahiri, all significant AQ leaders were first members of the MB. This is what he says about the MB. Current conditions have brought on unprecedented opportunities, and the coming of Islamic governments that follow the Salafi doctrine is a benefit to Islam. So don't believe the hype. They are very happy about the Arab Spring. Very happy. There is a sizable direction within the Ikhwan that holds the Salafi doctrine. So the return of the Ikhwan and those like them to the true Islam is a matter of time. The MB, the Ikhwan, is coming back to us, to the Salaf, to the true Muslims. They're not a competitor. They're just people who are more slowly evolving towards Salafism, to fundamentalism. I'm going to share, because I stuck on Egypt now, and I know Syria is the flavor of the day, but 2 minutes. Egypt is more important than Syria by fact. By fact. Very brave person you know, very brave young lady, decided to go to Egypt during the removal of Morsi as an American. And she brought home some very interesting photographs. Photographs that you will not see on CNN or even Fox. This is from the Egyptian street. This is an Egyptian, in English, holding up the sign, "This is not a coup. We're getting rid of a dictator. That's not a coup." This sign, fascinating, written in English, "Obama, stop financing terrorism in Egypt. Who are they talking about? The Ikhwan. Stop supporting the Brotherhood government because every dollar you send to them supports terrorism. Fascinating. Not even in Arabic, in English for us, and we don't even get to see it in the media. The next one I just think is priceless. They know our culture so well, our pop culture. Recognize Clinton, you know what you did last summer. This is the Egyptian people.
This is the American ambassador.
Yeah, it's
Well,
Patterson.
Same difference, right? So they understand the threat there, and they're trying to make us wake up to it. Yeah, 8,000 miles away. And as my wife said, we're just sprinting with our blindfold on. Okay. Last point. Let me take you to the super strategic level. I've been a victim of everything my wife discussed. I teach the FBI, I teach the DOD. I am now, every time I go to Quantico, required to submit my slides to a nameless censorship body, which will tell me which slides I can use and which I can't use. The FBI isn't allowed to know the identity of the person, the DOJ, who does the censorship. And if I disagree, there is no appeal. I am not allowed on base. No appeal. And I've got a PhD in this, and I'd love to argue with the guy about, really? Why can't I talk about jihad? Yeah? That is still in place today. But where does all this come from? One slide to explain it all, and Patrick can give you much more detail as well. A very senior individual in the NCTC, National Counterterrorism Centre, was sent to the UK on an exchange program to analyse the British way of dealing with radicalisation, Islamic jihadism. And timing really is everything. He was there just at the point when Britain was waking up to the fact that all their CT counter-radicalization policies were bankrupt and actually empowering the Brotherhood, the bad guys. And he was looking at, who did this, who did that, taking notes, and he leaves the UK to come back to Washington just as the UK is about to completely get rid of their approach and revamp it. It's the contest and prevent policies. So he's got the wrong recipe book. He comes home and is promoted to the White House to be senior advisor on counterterrorism issues. And this bad recipe is what we are now living in America. Because he said, and you can check this stuff online, he said, in the world of Islamism, of people who wish to create a caliphate, there are three separate groups. There are the purists, on the left, the purists, who believe purely in dawah, in proselytization and teaching. They're in the ivory tower, and we're going to preach, we're going to talk about Islam, and sooner or later people will join us. Then we have, according to him, separately, the political Islamists who say, Friday in the mosque is not enough, you have to actually get out there and fight the political fight. You have to create organizations, win elections, and so forth. Classically, of course, this is the MB. So there's the preachers, the purists, and the MB. Finally, the tiny, tiny fraction are the violent Islamists. The people who say, politics is never going to get us where we want to go. You've got to pick up a gun, build an IED, and we've got to get the caliphate together through the use of force. The argument of this senior policy individual is that these are three hermetically separated organizations, have nothing to do with each other, and that American lives can only be saved by negotiating with the Islamists. That is why Ambassador Patterson has to go and shake Badia's hand, because it is the political Islamists who can stop the killing of Americans. Despite the fact, as I said, every single LEQ leader and high-value target is formally first a member of the Brotherhood. Of course, the reality is this. It is a complete overlapping Venn diagram, and there is no hermetically separated purists from politicians from violent terrorists. Okay, concluding slide. This is the only message I like to give. After all the words, this is the only thing that counts, because in DC, nobody will tell you this. The fact is, We obsess on this. Our 25-meter target in US government for the last 12 years is the kinetic threat. Got to stop the next 9/11. We've got to make sure there's no IEDs on the streets of Baltimore. That's the threat. We've got to send us troops to destroy the kinetic opposition. Despite the fact that the non-violent jihadists, the stealth jihadists that Frank and others have so bravely written about, outnumber the violent jihadists by factors of thousands. And the real point is, they both have what? The same strategic goal. Undemocratic theocracies from Washington to Cairo. Yeah? The same intent. They may argue amongst themselves, and sure they do argue, but the arguments are almost exclusively about timing and tactics. You see Qaradawi saying, hey, Islamists in Europe, hang on, slow down, yeah? Because they're going to wake up to you. Timing, not tactics. Okay. This is, I've been asked to finish. This is my conclusion. I'm here to talk about the approach ahead, US strategy. A couple of points we can expand on in Q&A. This is what I think, Dr. Gorka, personal opinion, has to happen. As a nation, we must think and act strategically. We haven't for about 20 years, Democrats or Republicans. This requires prioritization of interests. Is Afghanistan more important than Syria? Is Iraq more important than Egypt? We have to make these decisions. That's called strategy. Saying we're going to do everything is impossible even for America. All actions must be based upon the understanding of context. If you get this wrong, your plan is not worth anything. And as a result, for example, the Middle East and North Africa must be understood to be a whole. You cannot solve Syria without dealing with Iran. You cannot solve Egypt without understanding Saudi Arabia. Yeah? These aren't sui generis compartmentalized issues, except in the White House. We must have a broader concept of warfare. Now, this is getting into a little terminology here. We must do political warfare or special warfare. This is a terminology used in Fort Bragg. And it must become a national function. Not done in Fort Bragg or in Tampa, but political warfare and special warfare must be done in Washington. There should be a JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command, for special warfare, meaning political, economic, and legal attack. There must exist a national strategy for special warfare. Yeah? For the broadest understanding of attack, and lastly, we must begin aggressive PSYOPs. And I mean PSYOPs. I'm not going to use the phrase MISO, which is anathema, military information support operation. What a political correct load of rubbish. Psychological operations, including things such as supporting reformers. So there you have it.